My family started United Cerebral Palsy in 1946 because there was a cousin who was born and nobody knew what was quote unquote wrong with him.
Jack and Ethel Hausman realized together that there was no facilities, no way of exposing this child to the real world. In many, many places, when somebody visited somebody's home, the child was kept out of sight, so they put the child in a closet while visitors came. Jack and Ethel were devoted to bringing this issue into the mainstream of American society.
They set upon what I know to be a worldwide search for answers.
Jack and Ethel put an ad in the New York Times asking parents who had children that had similar characteristics to come to a meeting. One of the ones who came to that meeting was Leonard Goldenson, who later became chairman of American Broadcasting and also had a child with a disability.
My parents had a daughter, and my mother noticed early on things weren't moving along quite right. They couldn't understand, the doctors, how extensive it might be, nor did they have a name for it. My parents knew in their own search for answers how difficult they were to come by. They wanted to have a go-to place for people with disability, and ultimately UCP became the go-to place.
So they decided to start an organization called United Cerebral Palsy to help those kids. And that's what we try to do, continue to help those kids. In the 50s, the board was focused on fundraising. To Leonard Goldenson and Jack Hausman, that meant a telethon for United Cerebral Palsy.
We're here tonight to help build a future for them, a future free of cerebral palsy.
The idea for the telethon was actually my mother's idea. She never got the credit, and I want to be sure she gets the credit. My father, who was the founder, chairman of ABC, went to all the station owners and asked them if they would clear time and put programming on the air that would raise money for cerebral palsy.
And it was a lot of effort going in for all of us. We had thousands of volunteers.
So I remember my brother, my sister, other cousins, and I working at the telethons. It was a lot of fun, and we were very excited to be a part of it.
The telethon was filled with stars. One after the other came through on a totally voluntary basis.
It was a cavalcade of stars. People were motivated to call in sometimes just to speak with a celebrity.
We had a humanitarian award dinner along with the telethon. And I met President Eisenhower. I met Lady Diana. Henry Kissinger and I had a wonderful conversation. We had Muhammad Ali. He was terrific. I went to the Beatle concert for the benefit of United Cerebral Palsy. My father, myself, my wife, my mother. It was so loud I couldn't hear myself think. So it was really terrific. It was the associations that were part of the charity were so much fun.
I think the telethon was not only so important for raising money, but for raising consciousness. Into the home for the first time in the history of this country came people with disability. It was really an incredibly eye-opening experience for so many. The other thing the telethon did, in my opinion, is it raised a generation of little philanthropists. Philanthropy is not about how much you give. It's about the fact that you give. So this whole generation of philanthropists came about watching the telethon. My mother was watching the landing of the first man on the moon on television, and she was angry. And she said to my father, they can put a man on the moon, but what are they doing for people on Earth?
Remember what cars looked like in the 30s and 40s? There were big clunkers, heavy metal. That's what wheelchairs were made out of, heavy steel and totally unmanageable.
You can get this huge, heavyweight machine to the moon, And she said, why can't you adapt that to a wheelchair?
Leonard Goldenson, who was chairman of the board of American Broadcasting, obviously had wide breadth of acquaintanceships and some within NASA. And he asked him a very simple question: can you give me a wheelchair that a disabled person can lift? And they did.
It was revolutionary. And so many other things came about as a result of looking at and addressing the needs of the public.
The next big, strong effort came when Willowbrook was exposed by Geraldo Rivera.
And I think that particularly at Willowbrook that we have a situation that borders on a snake pit.
It's been more than 6 years since Robert Kennedy walked out of one of the wards here at Willowbrook and told newsmen of the horror he'd seen inside. He pleaded then for an overhaul of a system that allowed retarded children to live in a snake pit. Somehow we'd all forgotten.
Willowbrook was a state school, a very large institution where individuals who were very disabled were placed in those institutions, in some cases when they were kids.
Rivera got access to the Willowbrook Hospital and found conditions that were just ridiculously deplorable.
Willowbrook became a symbol of abuse. I think the whole field was saying, look, we can't tolerate people living in terrible institutional settings. And so they brought this civil rights case, which ended up as being the Willowbrook Consent Decree. It captured and crystallized what indeed should be a standard for care across the board.
The institution had to be emptied by a certain date. So private agencies like ourselves went to the institution, interviewed the clients, and accepted into our programs the clients that fit our profile.
We would have not achieved this breakthrough, this new era, this kind of human rights effort in New York without the community-based organizations like New York City UCP.
What I think makes UCP really unique was that they understood unless you're willing to affect social change, you're really not going to be able to impact those individuals in the way you should. In 1975, a parent could literally bring a child with a disability into the local public school and be turned away by a principal. The district court judge said to the Board of Ed, "You are way out of compliance with federal law." One of the things that we required the Board of Education to do was to make one elementary school building and one junior high school building in each of the 30 community school districts accessible. By 1984, there were 111,000 children in special education receiving services in New York City. It was a huge accomplishment.
Governor Carey gave me enormous latitude and support in a budget process to develop community residential programs, to develop day programs, begin to close the state institutions. Organizations like New York City UCP are going to be looking at innovative approaches, new ways of thinking about their role in the community.
Conductive education was a program that featured intensive therapy, intensive education, and really a pushing of children to become as independent as possible. UCP actually started doing it in the mid-'80s, and we're one of the few organizations in the country that did it. The classroom is adapted with both ladder-like structures, plinth tables, so that the kids really have to get up out of their chairs and push themselves up in order to build up their upper body strength and their lower body strength. We did find it that was very, very useful for children and actually moved them along in the education and other spectrum to where they could take advantage of integrated classes.
I created an event, and it was called Women Who Care. It certainly raised a lot of money, over $10 million in the 15 years. One year for Women Who Care, we were gifted with quite a number of iPads.
The best thing is for people to have the tools and the information and the technology that they need to live the fullest life possible. And so SHARE was born of that thinking.
The agency created a floor in our 23rd Street building for assistive technology. Nobody had ever done anything like that before.
Well, UCP is what I would call a full-service organization. We have services for families and kids who are very young, a school-age program in Brooklyn, in addition to all of our adult learning and activity centers and supervised, supported, and independent housing.
And throughout UCP's history, the people who work directly with individuals, the people who manage the organization, really understood what impacted each person that they served.
I've been working with UCP for 35 years. We as caregivers or staff people, we just let the individual know that, hey, you're just as good as she is or he is. You're no different. Nikki came to us 10 years ago, and she just needed someone to just make her feel more at home. She has become a better person, a better human being, a better individual.
UCP of NYC gives so much hope and purpose to people with disability insofar as every possible aspect of life is possible.
My journey has been exactly what I've wanted my whole life. I work at this children's program. What I do is answer phones, take messages. It's amazing to be able to live on my own. I have a cat now. I love him so much. I feel so free and able to do what I want. UCP makes that possible.
We see our mission as both adapting the environment to the needs of people with disabilities, adapting society to the needs of people with disabilities, so they can live the most independent and dignified life.
I do think that the founding families would be really pleased to see where the agency is today. We've come through so many changes, and now we're at the point of yet another change, all of which is about adapting to everything, all the services that are there for everyone.
The core of what UCP was in the beginning and still is that one-on-one service with people to get them the things that they need. I think the key to us in the future is not so much we're bringing people in, but bringing ourselves out into the communities.
People can have opportunities by adapting, and others by adapting what they do to accommodate people with disability is vital.
We can't rest on our successes. We cannot rest on our laurels and think the status quo is going to continue. It's not. We fought hard to get to where we are today, but in order for us to get to the next period of time, the next era, we need your voices again.
The thing that pleases me the most is when I'm walking through New York City and I see a disabled person on a scooter in the park throwing a ball in a softball game. That wasn't possible. This person's having a full life, and that's what's important. And that's what we try to achieve. Helping people who are hidden in closets to a full, normal life.
It's just but begun. 70 years later, it's just but begun.